How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I am also well.
That's awesome.
Okay, you want to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we've been talking post-Sunday on the presentation on the Bible, where we got the Bible.
Yes.
Which was a lot of information, but is always kind of a struggle also because there's a lot of things that were left out.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of a reality when you're tackling 3,000
Right.
years of
And
history.
I already told you, you packed in so much for what I thought was a normal length sermon. We did see it was like, what, 45 minutes?
Yeah, close
but
to
still,
50.
it was so much the pace at which you went, and I still have questions. So.
Yeah, so and I think that's natural because there is a lot of things, and try to keep it at the basics, but also know there are the common questions that come up, and there's probably things I didn't address that maybe people were wondering about. So that's what we're doing. We figured we would take some extra time and kind of hit things that didn't make it into Sunday.
So I would recommend, if you haven't watched the sermon yet, this will make more sense after you've watched it.
We're not going to rehash all the kind of the topics we covered.
Right, and I might some of my questions relate to things he said. So yeah.
And that's what we figured we would do, is take some time and kind of, from your perspective, like coming off of Sunday, like what questions did you still have, or what things have you heard about that you don't have context for? And I always like to say, I by no means am a scholar, and there's lots of people that know way more than me, but yeah, if there's some things I've had the chance to read about or research, and will be helpful for people to gain a greater understanding. I'll share what I know, which feels really limited still.
Well, I feel like on the totally even end of that spectrum, and I hope maybe I represent more of you guys. I was just telling him, I've been in ministry for 20 years. I know the word, I love the Lord, but there's so much that it's making me realize I didn't know. And something that he mentioned yesterday is a lot of us just go by faith that the word is true. And so that's our starting point.
Yeah.
But I would say this kind of opens your eyes to even the outsiders who are looking in, saying, well, you guys believe this is true, but how do we even know this document, this book of documents and letters is true? And so one of the questions that I thought about that came up as he was talking about like the things that how the Bible came together, and it came from the Catholic Church. So I was like, well, why is the Catholic Bible different than the Bible we read today?
Yeah, which we didn't get a chance to get into. So we did cover, we talked about the 66 books that are in the Protestant Bible. And so there are other writings. So if you grew up in a Catholic tradition, there's another group of books in there that are typically included. In a lot of Orthodox traditions, they are included. And so, that's a good starting point. Is on Sunday I did not mention what's typically called the Apocrypha. So that's typically the Protestant term for another collection of writings. You can find some different terms. I think the official Catholic designation is the deuterocanonical books. And so, we can start there. So one of the things we talked about on Sunday is that when the Old Testament was kind of formed into a volume was in what's called the Second Temple period. So kind of Book of Malachi ends, people have returned from the exile. There is some stability in Jerusalem with the Jewish people. The Temple of Solomon is rebuilt, not at the same level, but that's when a lot of scholars believe that's kind of like when the Old Testament was formed into a volume, which is still about 400 years before Jesus shows up on the scene. So sometimes this is called the intertestamental period. So during this time in the life of Israel, there are still religious writings that take place. So that's what these books are. So they're in between Malachi and then Jesus showing up on the scene, and like John the Baptist, and where we kind of kick off the New Testament. And so there's quite a bit of writing that still comes out of this period for Israel. So if you've heard of names like the Maccabees, so there's even more than the Catholic Bible includes. There are a lot of writings that come out of this period. So they've been known about for, they weren't rediscovered or anything. They've kind of been known. But for Christians, there has always been debate on if they are part of the official canon, if they are divinely written from God, or if they're just extra writings.
Right, because that's something that you mentioned Sunday, that, obviously we believe that the word is inspired by God, but there have been other writings.
Yeah. Well, and just like today, Christians write books about the Bible.
Right.
Yeah. So, I've read lots of books that are not biblical books that are still helpful in my understanding of following Jesus.
So would you say that the Apocrypha, even though it's not inspired, is it true, or are they any weird?
Yeah, so that's I have not read it, so I've read about it.
Okay.
So like I said, it's one of those things for Christians. It's always been kind of debated. So even in early Catholic circles, when some of the questions of when we were still forming, like both putting Old and New Testament together, like, hey, what's in, what's out. And so that's why they're often called like deuterocanonical, like because there's debate about those.
Okay.
And so even one of the names we mentioned on Sunday was Jerome, who did the Latin translation of the Bible. So early church father. So his position was that they were helpful, but not at the same level of the rest of the Bible.
Okay.
But then Augustine, who's also a pretty common name, who his theological works formed the backbone of a lot of Western Christendom. Augustine thought they should be included. So there was even debate within the early Catholic Church, and so Catholic Church kind of went with the Augustine method of, yes, these are part of the official Bible. So one of the things with the Protestant Reformation, it was this, hey, some of it was let's return back to the basics. So less of the just church tradition and stances, and where do we go back to? And so one of the things they look to is that the Jewish people with the Old Testament, the Tanakh, what we talked about, do not include those books.
That's what I was just about to ask you,
Yeah.
because you didn't mention that on Sunday, and they seem to still hold to up till Malachi.
Yeah, so what we is typically in the Protestant Bible of the Old Testament, that is kind of taking from the Jewish tradition. So the Apocrypha are Jewish writings, but they were not given the same weight as the rest of the Old Testament.
Interesting to me. So they decided when the Catholic Church was growing, that's when they pulled those in, and so then the Protestant Church. Now that's something else I wanted to talk to you about. It's kind of off the Bible, but the Reformation.
Well, did that kind of answer the question though?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And so one of the things is the 66 books that are within what is typically the Protestant Bible. All Christians agree on those 66.
Okay.
These extra books that are in the Apocrypha, not all Christians agree that those are divinely written. So they're not considered evil, bad, contrary, just like not on the level of inspired. And so they have a lot of history of the Jewish people between those 2 points, Malachi to first century. And so they're not bad to read. We would just not say that they have the same weight as the other aspects of the Old Testament.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. So not evil, not bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and this is going to sound really silly, and I don't remember. We talked about the Council of Nicaea a little bit outside of Sunday.
Yeah.
And I know you kind of alluded to it in your sermon, because you said a lot of people say a bunch of people got together and decided which books were in, which books were out. And that's what I always thought. I always thought that the Council of Nicaea was when our Bible was decided, and then something you mentioned on Sunday was more about the early church, like first century church. That's when they were really deciding. Yeah. And so anyway, can you explain to me?
Yeah, so some of the councils affirmed what was already stances. And so you get some significant, so they weren't deciding, they were just like saying, yeah, we've always agreed on this.
Like an affirmation.
So Nicaea is looked at a lot because it was one of the first, so 325, way back. So so if you know the Roman Emperor Constantine, who ended up kind of becoming a patron for the early Christian church when it was becoming the dominant religion in the area. There was just the reality that there were so many churches and Christians and stuff that different teachings began to arise. And so at one point, he kind of organized it as being the emperor. He kind of had some sway. So they invited like all the bishops, which was just kind of the person who were over all the towns.
So this is still the Catholic Church, though?
They probably wouldn't have had the name Catholic Church at that point, but yeah, it is early history of the Catholic.
Pre-Reformation.
There wasn't. 325.
That's
so 1500s for Reformation.
Okay.
So there was two big things that happened at Nicaea, and why let's get together and talk about this. One was deciding when they wanted to celebrate Easter. So once again, it's in hindsight on those days and stuff. So they're like, hey, let's pick an official church day that we're going to commemorate the resurrection.
Okay.
And then the other one was that there was a teacher named Jacob Arius who had been teaching that Jesus was created. And so a lot of the councils that happen through the years are, hey, this new teaching has arisen. Is this part of actual Christian teaching?
Yes.
So it's not creating a new stance. A lot of times it was reaffirming. And so at Nicaea, there was this debate between Arius and what became called Arianism, which is identified as an early church heresy, and Trinitarian doctrine. So there was Arius, and then another church father named Athanasius kind of had a debate as far as like, hey, what is true teaching from the Word of God? And then they voted, and the bishops, the church collectively decided like, hey, this is outside of our teaching. This is heresy. You cannot say that Jesus was created because Jesus is eternally pre-existent with the Father. Just like John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Jesus was not created. He became incarnate. So that's what happened at Nicaea, was reaffirming the divinity of Jesus and also deciding when we celebrate Easter.
Were the books that you also talked about on Sunday that were not the Apocrypha? So there were the extra, like the Book of Thomas, some of those.
So kind of two different categories of what's talked about on people have excluded. So the Apocrypha, once again, dates back closer to Old Testament. So in between Malachi. So then there's another group of books that are typically called the Gnostic Gospels. So that has more to do with the New Testament. And so also in like the 200s and 300s AD, there was other writings that began to dovetail off of Christianity that had some connection to, but not really. And so there was actually the very first thing that Christians identified as heresy was actually called gnosticism. So there were these Gnostic teachers and thinkers that started to include they kind of took the Jesus term and started sprinkling other things in. And so the Gnostic Gospels, you can, if you Google that, you'll come up with these things. Are these writings. So once again, we talked about the criteria. All of them date after the 1st century, and they would be just straight heresy. So the Apocrypha, we don't consider the Bible, but is a part of the Jewish literary tradition. The Gnostic Gospels, a lot of them took names from the apostles. Like there's one that is called the Gospel of Thomas. Is not written by Thomas the Apostle. So they took some of those names, and then it completely divulges from the true teaching of the scriptures. So they have alternative accounts of Jesus' life. It might be Thomas. So there's one I know that like describes Jesus' childhood. And so these are not from the apostles. These are not with the teachings of the rest of the New Testament.
And obviously people who lived way after he died.
So the whole like Gnostic theory, one of it is this idea of secret knowledge. Which kind of gets into it's like, hey, here's this hidden knowledge that the church kept from you. And so so that was early on gained some traction in the 1st century, because the other big thing with Gnosticism was kind of like anything fleshly is evil and the spirit is what is true. And so the Gnostic heresy, the first thing was limiting Jesus's humanity. And so because flesh, humanness is kind of evil and corrupted, and so only spirit is true. So they're like, so Jesus, if he was perfect, didn't actually take on human form. So the first heresy was
because he's fully God, fully man.
So that's how you see that the church has affirmed true doctrine. We didn't like create it at different points. We've just affirmed what was true from the scriptures. So the first heresy, Gnosticism, was Jesus wasn't fully man. The second heresy, Arianism, was Jesus wasn't fully God. And so, there was, kind of around the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was another big archaeological find called the Nag Hammadi. It's named for a town in Egypt. So also in the 40s, they rediscovered the collection of the Gnostic Gospels. And so there has been some like, this is what the church didn't want you to know. But once again, a lot of the other early church fathers in the 1st and 2nd century have writings talking about, either debating with the Gnostics, or it was always considered outside of true Christian teaching. So it's been outside of orthodoxy since the beginning. They're old documents, but they're not true teaching. They're alternative accounts from the Gospels that were not written by the people who were with Jesus.
Okay, I kind of want to take it back because you're talking about things that were outside of the Bible, and that's something else that I kind of wanted to get into, because again, this may come from like an unbeliever stance, like is this book really true? Because you've talked about dating and times of like when things were written, and even scientific dating, I'm assuming, of these documents, like that's how some of those things were decided.
So it is hard on that. So like most of the things, that's why there's kind of like, hey, this is when I think it is. Because actually having like a piece of papyrus that is like an original, so like even like the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old
Yeah.
Testament, none of our copies are the ones Moses wrote.
Right. Okay.
You know,
yeah.
because it's like
yeah.
this copy of this
Keeping
copy.
that.
So like our oldest copies of the Old Testament date to about 300 or 400 BC.
Okay.
But those are documents that are saying this many thousands of years ago, or when this person was king of whatever.
Right.
And so that's where some of the dating comes in.
Okay.
Because there's other historical, archaeological, other accounts of some of, like when they were in Egypt, you know?
Yeah.
Pyramids, Ramses II. There's other datings that correspond.
Yeah,
like, okay, the
outside
Hebrews
the Bible,
are saying they
things like that.
interacted with these people, and we know these people were at this point in time.
Okay.
So the dating is always a little, there's usually a range.
Right. Okay. But I remember you said something about this on Sunday, about, I guess less about the dating, but more about how the Old Testament, when it was formed and all that. I asked you outside of Sunday, like other books and things that were being written. Could you talk about this? Is like the book, named book, and so tell me, like, what else would we compare the writings that were written as old as the Bible?
Yeah, so there's a few that just like, as far as like historically go, are as old as the Bible, and some, you know what you find archaeologically and stuff. So there's a couple that get a lot of prominence. One is called the Code of Hammurabi.
Okay.
So that's usually, you'll hit that in world history and stuff.
Yeah,
and so that one's kind of significant. So it's actually like, in anything that survived, it's usually, if it wasn't paper, and usually the civilizations that had prominence. So it's actually like, the Code of Hammurabi is actually a written text that's on this like obelisk, I think is the term.
Okay.
Kind of like
stone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's considered very.
And was that Egyptian or?
No. Mesopotamian maybe.
Oh, I think that does sound correct.
Yeah, because I think it was actually found in Iran. I think that's where where it was discovered.
Okay.
So it dates quite old. I think like 1700 BC. Like so around the time that the Bible is being written.
Okay.
And so it is actually pretty significant because it's like from a king Hammurabi, but it is like a written law.
Yeah.
And so that's significant because a lot of times it was like, okay, whatever the king says goes, but it was like a codified law.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of connections that are drawn between it and the Old Testament law because similar time frame and similar mindset. The like rule of law is kind of a new idea,
like order,
civilization wise, not as just whatever the king says, but like no, the king answers to the law too.
Okay.
And so there is connections, like, and usually it's asked like, did one influence the other or vice versa?
Yeah.
Which I think is fine either way.
Yeah, no.
Human wisdom comes from the Lord, and so if Hammurabi caught on to the fact that people should answer to rules, that's a good thing. Yeah. And so that dates as far back, and once again is like a stone thing,
right?
And so it's a very historic like object that's been around for a long time.
I learned about that in 7th grade.
Yeah, people people talk about it because it is like some of the first like rule of law.
Yeah,
it's like they talk about kind of the progress of humans towards civilization.
Yeah,
is along those lines. So Code of Hammurabi. The other biggest one is considered the oldest work of literature for humans I think ever found is the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Okay.
So once again, I think I covered that in like literature in college.
Yeah.
But that one, so they actually have stone tablets with these stories written on it. So that I believe dates to more around like 2000 BC.
Whoa.
So even what they think these tablets that they have are a little bit older than the Code of Hammurabi.
Okay.
Once again, would be the same time frame as when we believe parts of the Old Testament were being written.
Right.
We don't have stone tablets of the Old Testament that date that far back
because it was on.
So once again, there's that debate because also, so like with the story and of Gilgamesh, it's considered the first epic. There is overlap. There's like a creation narrative. There is a flood narrative.
Oh.
So once again, sometimes the question is asked like, okay,
why
did this influence the biblical writers, or were they observing same events?
Right.
So you get some of that of like, hey, this is just as old as the Bible, and did it? Sometimes it's more of like, okay, this was the first humans who wrote things down, and then the biblical authors kind of like took that story and ran with it, versus like, is it actual events or is it just inspired events?
Yeah.
And so you get those comparisons a lot with both Hammurabi and then the Epic.
And you mentioned this in your sermon, but there were also New Testament people outside of the Bible who were actually kind of confirming what was being put at the New Testament. I forgot the name of one of the guys you mentioned who had said, like something about 22 of the books of the New Testament were
so the
listed
formation,
out. With the formation of the New Testament and how some outside, even though they're not inspired authors, they were kind of like vouching that these books were being written.
Yeah, so as church developed, so you kind we have the book of Acts, so we know like, hey, apostles are going here, churches are coming here. You get some characters who didn't know Jesus personally, but are still in the Bible. So you get like a Barnabas who hung out with Paul, so wasn't one of the 12. You get Timothy, who's a little bit younger, so wasn't there with Jesus. You get John Mark, who didn't know Jesus, but wrote parts of the New Testament. So kind of just as things progress, and as apostles start getting killed, but Christianity is flourishing and going off, you kind of have the next wave historically, sometimes called the patristics, or the post-apostolic age. And so it's like, okay, this guy didn't know Jesus, but he did meet John. And so you get some of those very early church fathers that also wrote and did things. So I mentioned a guy named Irenaeus. So and there's a lot. A lot of them also, if you're from the Catholic tradition, a lot of them are sainted because they did early things of the church. A lot of them were also martyred for their faith under Rome. So you kind of get that. And that was also one of the things when they would argue with the Gnostics on like, okay, what's the true account of Jesus? And it's like, okay, you're saying this is what Jesus taught, but I knew Barnabas, who knew Paul, who met Jesus. And so they kind of had that direct lineage. As like they were establishing like, no, the canon is closed. These are inspired scriptures. These are not. So you get a lot. There's a guy named Polycarp who knew John. You get Clement in Rome. There's a lot of writings from in the first century into the second century, and then it's just there's like a pretty clear chain as far as church fathers and having writings from church fathers that goes all the way back to the apostles, which is pretty significant.
So significant. One of the things that I was telling him too, that almost to me is the testament that it's true, is how this collection has stood the test of time, how it's still relevant. Some would say it's not, and I know a lot of people, especially in this culture, are challenging some of those truths, but like there have been so many people, incredibly smart scholars who have studied this and kind of dissected it, and just the overlapping. One of the things I was telling him too is just my own study of the word, seeing the prophecy about Jesus and then the prophecy fulfillment. And I think the number one thing for me that's faith building in it is it turns to be true as you interact with it. The word of God is alive and active in our lives. And so just, sometimes we can get into all the head stuff, which is what we're doing and what we've been doing.
Well, I think it's, great to know.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I don't want to just blind, faith is part of what we believe. I mean, it's the biggest part.
I've never seen Jesus.
But but you don't have to be like you can be brilliant and still believe. It's not like a
you don't have to turn your brain off to
right, and you don't have
Jesus.
to worry that the more you dig into it, it's gonna not stand up and be true. And I think it's not fragile, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think the Bible or God are afraid of tough questions or scrutiny, and plenty has been applied to that over the centuries. That I think the Bible is even if you weren't coming at it from a standpoint of faith, of literal Jesus being God who died and resurrected.
I mean, there's obviously evidence of that, because even our timeline, which I know the AD term has has it been renamed? It's not
typically they I think what's considered more scholarly now is before BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era.
Right.
Yeah, so that pivot.
But just such a shift, even just
it affected. Well, and a lot of that is Western history, when Christianity did become the largest religion and then kind of dominated the Middle Ages in Europe. The church became such an entity that it had such influence, kind of from Constantine on. That was kind of the progression. That's how that went, and which is a whole other conversation. If that was good for faith or bad for faith, but just a historical reality that definitely Western civilization and Christianity has. Had a dramatic impact on human history, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, I just love it. One of the things I was also telling him was we're in an age where there's so much information available to us, almost to where it's desensitized us, but then also we have this weird hunger. And I know that so much of media and things like that are informing what we believe or what we think are true. And I just think it's important that we go back and research these things. It's made me realize how much I didn't know and how much it would.
Well, I mean, it is hard to kind of know in detail 5,000 years of history. And that's why, typically if somebody, is a scholar, they're going to pick, I know this thing really well. And so, this is broad strokes, and Yeah, and so
It's been good.
I think my hope was more, a lot of times we encounter questions, or we might have our own questions, and maybe we just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah.
And just to know, like, the history of the Bible and the history of the church is documented. Like, like it is out there. There are answers. It hasn't been don't ask that question.
Right. And that's,
yeah. So I mean, ask those questions. Look at there is a lot of archaeological evidence. There are those things that like one of the things we talked about Sunday is like the Old Testament has several points of comparison on has it been adjusted, has it been changed.
Oh yeah.
We have all the manuscripts from the New Testament, and so like so whether you believe it is divinely written from a supreme God is one question. Is it an accurate testament that is been consistent throughout centuries? I think that is objectively confirmable.
Yeah.
That's
and
really so I mean that doesn't answer the faith question on.
It still does require faith.
Ultimate realities, but like, can you be like, okay, this book we're reading in 2022, is it the same as when it was written in the first century? I think you can have very reasonable confidence that it is.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible. Is there anything else you would add or want us to know about it?
Oh, I don't know. There's
so much.
Big. Yeah, the Bible's big. Yeah, and honestly, even for myself, I know I'm kind of in the position of dispensing information. I feel like my level of knowledge is very low. Like, once again, there's so many 5,000 years of history is a huge history,
right?
And there's a lot that goes into deciphering, interpreting a book that at some parts is 5,000 years old to different cultures, different contexts. One of the things I just find amazing though is like, you say even if you were outside of I have faith in Jesus, there's wisdom in the Bible.
Yeah.
A lot of it's about life because God made an ordered world. I'm always just really enthralled by Proverbs.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, this is, it's 4,000 years ago, and it's like, I've seen that situation play out, and that's helpful for me.
I know.
About how we treat our money, how we treat our family, all of those things, and to me, that is another confirmation of like, okay, this is from God,
right?
That it still has this embedded wisdom that is continuing, and people still look to it for wisdom, even outside of the faith in Jesus. People still look to the Bible for wisdom. It is one of the oldest or the oldest book that humans have, and we can still learn things from it, which is pretty phenomenal.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
it's obviously divine, and definitely, we would encourage you to dig into your Bible on your own, not just leaving it to the pastors on Sundays. I think
for sure.
Personal Bible study has changed my faith. So
absolutely. And I think we're in a day and age, with like literacy and stuff, that we all have the ability.
Right, the YouVersion app that you talked about. I have my Bible read to me often. So
we have so many resources, and that's even interesting. Even I hit this out on Sunday, like. U.S. Christians, like on average, have 9 Bibles in their house. So I do think we kind of take it for granted.
With all the crosses on our walls too.
Yeah, we have. I wondered. I still have
and our bumper stickers.
I haven't hit the age where I have the compulsion to put a bunch of crosses on my wall. Maybe it's coming for me. But I don't have a cross.
We don't have a cross wall.
But I do have a lot of Bibles. I have a lot of Bibles, and I still see them. They're like, oh, this new study Bible with these notes. Like,
this one looks so tempting.
I need that one.
I know I have the one with like the journaling on the side, and I'm like, But I also like going back to my Bible that I've marked all up, and it kind of is a memory for me of things that God taught me in the past.
Sure. So it's a significant book, and I hope some extra information helps people want to engage with it and encounter God through it.
Yeah,
that would be the hope.
I agree.
Sign off there.
I love it.
Let's call it.